Welcome to the Basketball Show. I'm your host, Paul Sir. I am thrilled to be joined by my good friend, Pat Boylan, the play-by-play voice of both the Indiana Pacers and the Indiana Fever. Pat, I have no idea how excited not just you, but your entire city and state must be right now with all that's going on with the greatest amount of excitement, I think, with having both the NBA Eastern Conference Finals combined with the start of an excitement over the Indiana Fever and the WNBA. My goodness, Indiana has always kind of been basketball heaven, but now this is another level of heaven.
Yeah, I think that's putting it pretty well. This is basketball heaven here for the next couple of weeks. In fact, I was just kind of looking at my own. I was just doing this for my own selfish purposes because I needed to start to put my schedule together for the next couple of weeks. And I was on, just a traditional like block grid type of calendar. And then when I put all of the dates down for the Eastern Conference Finals, now that we know them, and the Fever games, I went, wait a minute, there's one open date here between the 20th and the 31st. There's only one block in my calendar that didn't have a game down there. So yeah, between the Fever, who actually open up their season on Saturday, the 17th, and then the Pacers, whose Eastern Conference Finals run will begin on Wednesday, it's an extremely hectic time. But if you can't get excited for this, then you're in the wrong industry, you're in the wrong business. And the Indy 500, of course, is massive here too. That's a venue that puts 350,000 people inside of it on Sunday, the 25th. And then the Pacers also have game 3, which is the first home game of the Eastern Conference Finals happening that night. So it's kind of gotten the moniker. It'll actually be the 4th time that's happened in the history of our city where the 500 is on the same day as a Pacers playoff game. You need an Eastern Conference Finals run for that to happen. The moniker that it has received around here is Pacers and Racers. So if you're anywhere around Indianapolis, listening to the radio, watching on TV, bellied up to a bar, you hear the term Pacers and Racers here constantly. And when you add the Fever to the mix and all the spotlight around Caitlin Clark, and we're going to have 18,000 people in that building too on Saturday and then again on Tuesday. I mean, it's hard to believe. It's so fulfilling and gratifying and exciting. And I was asked in another news interview that I was doing right before I jumped on with you, if you could think of one word to describe it, what would you? And I really struggled to come up with the word because it just felt like nothing fully defined and encapsulated what this is all like. It'll be a busy couple of weeks, and hopefully for the Pacers and obviously Fever too, we're talking about June being busy as well. But stuff like this, the Caitlin Clark experience, but then also there's only 4 of the 30 NBA teams that get to experience this every year. And it just does not come around all that often. And so I've just been telling anybody, whether it's people in our organization or just fans or friends or whomever, soak this in, because it's not always like this and it's not always going to be like this.
Yeah, these are precious times when you're in this particular industry. And like you said, only 4 out of 30, that isn't many. And to have the opportunity now to be able to experience this, Pat, this kind of insanity is just, it's really special. So let's talk about the Pacers. Now, the last time you and I spoke, you were very clear about the Cavs being favored and the Pacers having to play perfect basketball in order to be able to compete and make it a series. Well, let's put the asterisks in right away. Yes, the Cavs had some injuries. But to me, the Pacers, if you with or without the injuries, I have a hard time envisioning that the Pacers would not have won that series. To me, they clearly were the better team, top to bottom, and were ready to capitalize on their experience from last year, seemed to really know what it takes to be successful in a multi-game playoff. And my, oh my, did they do a great job against the Cleveland Cavaliers.
Yeah, I know we don't know who the Eastern Conference final opponent is yet, Knicks or Celtics, but maybe I should give that same analysis to you because it worked pretty well
Yes.
for the Cavaliers series. It was just kind of a crazy series because I kept finding myself thinking, wow, I can't believe this is happening so many times. And please don't misunderstand. Like, I've been around this team for over a decade, and this iteration of this team, it is special. I mean, Tyrese Haliburton has done some incredible things in his young career. Rick Carlisle is a Hall of Fame level head coach. There's no question that there are the players and people in this organization to pull something like this off. So beating the Cavaliers, to me, not shocking, although no question going into it, you're the underdog. I mean, they won 64 games. They blew out Miami in the first round. I think the most lopsided series ever in the first round. And so the Pacers had a great year to that point, but what Cleveland had accomplished was really, really impressive. They became just, and this is unfortunate, a negative nugget about the Cavaliers, but going into this playoffs, there had been 27 teams in NBA history that had won at least 64 games. And of those 27, 24 of them reached at least the conference finals. And in most cases, they reached the finals and in many cases won the championship. So not getting to the Final Four when you win 64 games, very, very rare. And so that's just kind of what the Pacers were going up against. I am not surprised the Pacers won the series. I thought if things broke the right way and if they played a great series, that they definitely had a chance to do so. You know, I think you kind of circle when you're the underdog game 6. If everything goes right in the series, you might have a chance to close it out at home in game 6. And that's kind of what I had done at the beginning. And, you know, it's really just amazing, and I think speaks to the maturity of this group. You won game 1 on the road, but this team has done stuff like that all of the time, gone somewhere and surprised some team. To me, that was not surprising at all. What was so impressive was when you do that as the underdog and you win game 1 on the road. Now, I know New York literally just did it too, so it's kind of in the forefront of everybody's mind, but game 2, the home team almost always gets because their backs are against the wall. They're at home. They're the team with the better record. I mean, almost always that game goes to the home team, and then you split the series 1-1, and you feel good as the road team, haven't gotten that split. For the Pacers to trail that whole game 2 and then to pull it out, and then when you're up 3-1 and backs against the wall for Cleveland and back at home, I mean, games 2 and 5 are not the type of games that the road team typically wins in the scenarios that the Pacers were in. And for them to get both of those, I thought just really speaks so highly to the maturity of what's a pretty young team, although Pascal Siakam coming into the mix certainly gave them a ton of needed experience. But, you know, look, I back when we talked, I totally believed the Pacers had a chance to pull off the upset, but I would be lying to you if I thought that they had a realistic chance of pulling it off in 5 games without some catastrophic injury type event happening for the Cavaliers. And Garland wasn't 100%, and maybe Mitchell wasn't at the end. But the Pacers just kind of flat out dominated this series. And if they needed to play perfect, well, they didn't play perfect in game 3, that's for sure. But I would say the rest of that series is about as well and as close to perfect as you can play from the Pacers' perspective.
I'm talking to Pat Boylan. He is the voice of both the Indiana Pacers and the Indiana Fever here on the Basketball Show. You know, Pat, I agree with you. Upset, yes, you have to qualify it as an upset because of Cleveland's regular season record. But I've seen a lot of negative press, not just on the Cavaliers, but on the Eastern Conference as well, about, and by negative, that maybe is a bit of an overstatement, but it's more of a lament of what is it with this Eastern Conference that you have a team like this that has a record, a record like they had, and they come into this series, and it seems like when the going got tough, they withered. Whereas the Pacers, as the going got tough, they got better. Now, I don't know necessarily that you can make this an East-West thing, but what are your thoughts on that? Because, for a long time now, even though the Celtics are the defending NBA championships, the East has always been regarded as somewhat inferior to the West. What are your thoughts on that kind of commentary on the Cavaliers performance, but also on the strength of the Eastern Conference.
Yeah, I think it's a little overblown, but it would be wrong to dismiss it as a total non-factor. I mean, if you're watching this Oklahoma City-Denver series, you're going, goodness gracious. Yeah. I mean, look how good Oklahoma City is, and yet they're pushed right to the brink here with the Denver Nuggets, and we'll see. The West, top to bottom, I think is unquestionably stronger. You know, you didn't have any playoff opponents in the West that were kind of like Miami in the East, where they were a team. By no means did I think Memphis was going to upset Oklahoma City, but Ja Morant, Jaren Jackson Jr., Bane, they've got the type of players that you would not be surprised to see a team like that in the second round. A team like Miami would have been truly surprising to see them in the second round. And a team like the version of Orlando this year, I think would have been surprising to see them in the second round. But where I would push back on a lot of that is Boston is the defending champion and won 60 games, and the only team that won more games than the Cavaliers was Oklahoma City. And so at the very top, I think the East stacks up just fine with the West. And so I think that's kind of what's made this playoff so amazing. And I saw an amazing stat where as long as New York, I believe, wins their series, then if you add up all of the seeds of the final four teams, each of the last 3 years, that number will be the 3 highest years in the history of the NBA. And what I'm getting at is upsets are happening, right? Because that means you're not having 1 versus 2 and 1 versus 3 on each side, or 1 versus 3 and 2 versus 4 or something like that. You're getting true upsets getting to the conference finals. And I actually think that's really good for the NBA. If there's one thing about the NBA playoffs that, it tends to get dogged for, is just over the course of 7 games, it can be hard to have upsets. The parity level in the sport just in general is different from hockey in that regard. Whereas in hockey, your powers are your powers, but you see all the time upsets happen. In the NBA playoffs, they're less likely. So I think it's been really good just to have these last few years of Cinderella type runs like you see in the March Madness tournament happening in the NBA. And easy for me to say, my organization has been one of those each of the last 2 years. But I think Boston and Cleveland are at the top of, I think they would hang in more than fine in the Western Conference at the top. You maybe don't have the same level 1 through 10 in the East. But look, as somebody that grew up in Indy in the 90s, you don't often hear me do what I'm about to do, which is give the New York Knicks a lot of credit because they were the despised team growing up, and it's been kind of fun to bring this rivalry back. But look, there's no doubt the Pacers and the Knicks are 2 teams that if you are the better seeded team, you don't want to play in the playoffs. Both of these teams are tough. They're gritty. When you get into the clutch moments on the Knicks side, how good Jalen Brunson has been, and an unbelievable stat that was provided to me by our TV play-by-play voice, Chris Denary. If you look at the NBA's definition of a close game, which is a game within 5 points in the final 5 minutes, the Pacers have won 14 of their last 15 of those games dating back to the regular season. So the Pacers and the Knicks, we'll see if the Knicks get it done. But they're 2 teams that, punch above their weight class a little bit, which is kind of silly to say about a team from New York, but they sort of have an underdog type of feel about them, are really good in the clutch, really tough, really gritty, and not the type of team a favorite wants to see. And I think the Pacers deserve so much credit for knocking off a 64-win team. And I think if the Knicks take out the defending champion, I'll feel the exact same way about them. And we'll get Pacers and Knicks, for an Eastern Conference Finals, if that's the case, when those 2 teams matched up for the epic series in round 2 last year. And of course, in the 90s, it felt like those 2 teams met every year at some point in the playoffs. So it's possible we get another edition of this rivalry renewed.
Man, when you think of that's a matchup that I don't give enough thought to. But the 90s Knicks against the 90s Pacers, my gosh, the beef, the shooting, the trash talking, the physical play. What an amazing matchup that was in that particular era. That was such a cool, for lack of a better description, that was such a cool era. And to have those iconic teams and players literally throwing punches in the corner at each other. That was amazing to watch, wasn't it?
It's what I grew up on. I was born in 1990, so 90s Knicks, Pacers and Knicks. I mean, it's how I fell in love with the league. It's how I fell in love with basketball. It was, Reggie Miller, which it's so funny. It's just like what's old is new again here as we potentially bring this rivalry back for a second straight playoff matchup. But like Tyrese Haliburton and Reggie Miller play very different styles of games. Tyrese Haliburton is a much, much better passer. Reggie Miller was, as good of a three-point shooter, non-Steph Curry division as there's ever been. But there are so many things that remind me of the two of them. Their propensity in the clutch moment. Halliburton hitting that shot in game 2 over Cleveland to win that game. How many big moments Reggie Miller had in the playoffs. Tyrese Halliburton's already had a bunch of them. Even something as simple where if you look at Tyrese Haliburton and he's kind of far away from you on the other side of the floor and you put Reggie Miller in his prime or early in his career, I should say, over there. I mean, they're both kind of twigs that are about 6'5", 6'6". They kind of look the same.
They do.
Frames are the same. Yep. And it's just funny that what's old is new again thing. The style of basketball has changed. The NBA has determined that style of basketball, while, to those who grew up in it or to those who love that era of basketball, is iconic. But it's decided that it wants a more free-flowing game where you can show off the skill sets of the players. And for the most part, I agree with that. But it's just amazing kind of how this is seemingly coming back into the realm, the rivalry realm here of Pacers and Knicks. And you've got a guy like Haliburton who has a lot of Reggie Miller tendencies. And, the Knicks were those 90s Knicks teams. Yes, they had Patrick Ewing, but they were so tough and gritty too. You don't think of sometimes the big market teams being the tough and gritty ones. You think of maybe Indiana types being that when they have success, but that's what this Knicks team is too. And I'll tell you, I mean, again, as somebody that grew up literally, that was like public enemy number one for me as a kid. But like, I have a lot of admiration for what the Knicks have done the past couple of years. They don't have a top 5 or 6 player in the league type superstar, but they're built as a true team. They're tough minded, they're gritty, and a lot of those qualities are true about the Pacers as well. And if we get another series between these two teams, I'd be shocked if it didn't go long, 6 or 7 games. Now, I frankly have been a little shocked that the first 2 rounds of the Pacers series didn't go long either. So I'm getting out of the prognostication business, but if we get Pacers and Knicks here again, it's just going to feel so fitting, I think, with the way these two teams play and the type of players that are on each roster and kind of hearkening back to that 1990s style of basketball.
Pat Boylan joining Paul Sir here on the Basketball Show, talking about the Pacers and the upcoming Eastern Conference Finals. A couple of thoughts that I just had. One is on the 90s Knicks. Can you imagine a front line of Ewing, Oakley, and Mason? I mean, that's like 1,000 pounds.
And they had Larry Johnson in the mix too.
Larry Johnson, I mean, beefy, strong, physical, like an offensive line more than a basketball front court. So, but I want to touch on the Pacers Knicks a little bit. I'm assuming the Pacers or the Knicks are going to win. You say that though, and Boston did look awfully good in a desperation game after losing Tatum in that tragic Achilles injury. But I still believe the Knicks are going to find a way, presupposing for just a moment that it is the Pacers and the Knicks. I do like the more physical play that's been added back into the NBA in the playoffs this year. It is more physical than I remember it being over the last few years. I think it's been overall good for the viewer to watch a much more physical brand of basketball in amongst all of the shooting, all of the fast pace. I'm really looking forward to seeing if this does come to fruition, that it is the Knicks and the Pacers, the up-tempo, push it, deep Pacers going against the rather limited roster of the Knicks that try to control the pace with a player like Brunson who doesn't jump over you and dunk, doesn't necessarily blast past you with lightning speed and quickness. but man, I don't know how you would even measure the size of the guy's heart and just the will and determination and how the whole team feeds off it. I just think it's a real compelling matchup of those two very unique teams.
Yeah, I completely agree. And, like I was saying before, it's not in my DNA to compliment the Knicks, but I really do have to, because the way they're built, the way they play, I thought the Bridges addition was huge. It would be a rematch of last year. But at the same time, Bridges was not a part of that team. Karl Anthony Towns was not a part of that team. They had DiVincenzo. The Knicks did a lot of changing in the offseason, but it all kind of centers around Jalen Brunson. And he's a fascinating guy for the reasons you've been describing, to have it all be centered around, because he was not a high draft pick for all those reasons you were just listing. He doesn't have lightning quick speed. He's small. He's tough, but he's not a big time athlete. How many times does the guy dunk? Who knows? I would love to know that number, because it's probably incredibly low. And yet he's a primetime performer. He's a perennial all-star for good reason. I mean, and when the playoffs come around, he always seems to be at his best. He's just so tricky. I mean, there's nobody in the league that uses like their center of gravity better than he does, and the shiftiness better than he does, and angles and all of that. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander would be the other guy that kind of jumps out, but He's got some more just some natural tools that even Brunson doesn't have. But I mean, he's a master at all of it, and a very, very tough player to defend from a Pacers perspective. And then, Indiana's point guard, Haliburton, who has a lot of natural abilities that maybe Brunson doesn't have, but he's also shown the ability over the last couple of years to be, I would say, equally as clutch. I think you're talking now about two of the most clutch players in the league. So you have this kind of excitement where if this matchup happens, the Knicks are just not the type of team that run away from you. They probably don't have that level of firepower where they're going to win a bunch of games by 20 points. Look at their playoffs in of itself. I think that off the top of my head, I think the game where Tatum got hurt might have been the biggest margin of victory that they've had in the playoffs so far. All those Pistons games were close, but when they're in close games, that's where they're comfortable. And if you just look at even Tyrese Haliburton alone in the moments that he's had, he hit the big shot in game number 2 to win it. Just a few days before that, he beat Giannis to the rim to close out the Bucks, and that incredible comeback in the playoffs last year. Haliburton had that crossover on Patrick Beverley to beat the Bucks in game number 3. And then game 7 in the Garden was far from just Tyrese Haliburton, but the Pacers put up one of the all-time offensive performances in one of the biggest games in one of the toughest buildings to play in. So if it is Pacers and Knicks, there are so many enticing storylines to that series and to what it all could mean. And again, I just think from a league parity standpoint, it's great. I know in a lot of ways, leagues will want their biggest stars and their top teams playing and making it deep into the playoffs every year. But at the same time, if you don't have the prospect of the Pacers upsetting the Cavaliers and the Knicks upsetting the Celtics, then your whole kind of playoffs diminish some, in my opinion. So the Knicks, again, you don't feel like a team from New York is ever a Cinderella type team, but as much as they can be, they are. The Pacers, I think, would certainly be in that category. And if you had 260 win teams go down in a 3 or 4 day stretch, that would have to be one of the more memorable moments, at least in the Eastern Conference, in recent memory.
And I think in the NBA in general, like when you're talking about you're not talking about 52 victory regular seasons. You're talking about 60 plus dominant regular seasons that just pretty much guarantee that you're going to see those teams battling in the Eastern Conference Finals. And it's not going to happen unless Boston can be one of them and come back from a 3-1 deficit. So, Pat, when you look over at the West and you look at this marvelous series between Denver and OKC, I don't think any of us expected this to be in Game 7. To be honest, as transcendent as Nikola Jokic is, with the firing of Malone, so close to the end of the regular season, with all of the upheaval that could have or should have created within the locker room, I thought what you saw last night was such a prime example of the raw willpower of Nikola Jokic, and then add in Jamal Murray playing sick and playing so well. And then, of course, you always love it, and this happens in so many games with a lot of teams, where out of nowhere something like Strother shows up and just has a game when you need it the most. But Jokic, there were two plays last night that embody why I think Jokic is so fabulous. One was that tremendous over-the-shoulder pass in the fourth quarter to Braun, cutting Braun underneath. Just ridiculous. But I think it was even maybe the next play where he made this gangly, awkward, he had, I think, Dort on his back at the free throw line. And he took one dribble and he kind of just tossed the ball up towards the rim going down the middle. And I forget who met him in the middle. It might have been Holmgren. And then it just rolled around and you just knew it was going to go in. And it's like the willpower of this guy is just incredible, and offset that with the marvelous play of Gilgeous-Alexander too. But I just think Jokic is just so special and fun to watch, because again, just like we're describing Brunson, he just defies everything that the analytics guys with their pen, with their pocket protectors and their pens and are sitting down in the basement judging talent. You got a couple of second round draft picks that are just so special.
No question. It was actually a conversation I was having with somebody recently, that in the analytic era of the NBA and all the 3-point shots going up and the positives and perhaps pitfalls that have come with that, it's actually pretty fascinating if you look at a lot of the top players in the league and how they don't really fit into that category. Jokic, obvious reasons, right? I mean, the guy looks like he would be at your local YMCA.
The Y on Saturday.
Yeah. And then he's the best. He's the best basketball player in the world. I don't even think you can argue that. As good of a year as Gilgeous-Alexander has had, which, by the way, Gilgeous-Alexander is in that list too, in my opinion, because while he has turned into a much better 3-point shooter, part of the reason he wasn't a super high draft pick and part of the reason why the Clippers were okay giving him up was because he was a very poor 3-point shooter early in his career. This is not a guy, even now, as good as he is, that blazes the nets from the 3-point line. And he takes a lot of mid-range shots too, which is, you don't do that. You don't shoot mid-range in today's NBA, except SGA does, and he has a ton of skill. Jalen Brunson does a ton of it, and he is a star that has his team on the verge of the conference finals. And Giannis is just kind of in his own otherworldly realm, but there's another guy. He's not a good 3-point shooter. He's not a good free throw shooter. It's just fascinating to me how in this era of analytics, it's so funny how the players that have been delivered to the NBA, so many of them that are at the top of this list are kind of anti what a lot of those trends are. And it's to me, it's made the game kind of fascinating. SGA and Jokic are so different. They're not actually playing against each other one-on-one on the floor, but just watching how their teams work. And look, there's no question, top to bottom, Oklahoma City has, maybe 8 of the top 10 players in this series. I would say 7, because I think Aaron Gordon deserves to be in that conversation. But top to bottom, the Thunder are just phenomenal. And I did not see this going 7, although once the Nuggets got game 1, to me, that completely changed the whole series and how you looked at it. Because when you get game 1, then you say, okay, there's no reason they can't split at home. They've got the MVP and they've got a great home environment, a ton of experience. And if they can split at home and split on the road, well, then you're 2-2. And then at bare minimum, you've guaranteed yourself a home game 6 to force a game 7. We saw that home game 6 last night, and it did force a game 7. If game 7 ends up being a close game near the end, and both teams are duking it out, I think this is going to be one of the best playoff series you've seen in a long, long time. It's been spectacular so far. the adjustments, the shot making, the defense, the experience, at times the Joker putting his whole team on his back, but at times, as you noted, Murray's played well. Strawther came out of nowhere and was brilliant last night. Christian Brown has had his moments. I mean, that's what the playoffs are all about, guys stepping up in the spotlight. And I didn't even mention Aaron Gordon, who absolutely should be, because it was his game one heroics that I think set up the whole series. So I thought that game one, more than any other series, game one was massive, because if Oklahoma City wins that game by 20 points, I'm not saying Denver's out. They still got 2 home games. When you've got Jokic, I'm not counting you out. But when they got game one, I thought it totally changed the entire makeup of that series and how you looked at it. And I hope we get a great game 7. And frankly, to be candid, I'm hoping Boston wins game 6, because I'd love to see a game 7 between both of those teams and get a couple here to send us into the conference finals.
Well, and especially since that would be 7 games on a pretty short bench in New York. Not that you're a homer at all.
No,
of course not.
That also comes into play. Yes, that would be I think a positive for the Pacers. So that would be a fascinating storyline, because the Pacers got done on Tuesday. Yeah. I was just at practice, and there's a lot of conversation of making sure you don't let rust seep in to the rest of this equation. Rest in terms of getting some rest. And if that were to go game 7, the Pacers would have 8 days, and the Knicks or Celtics would have 2. So that would be something that, especially from a Pacers perspective, as a fast-paced team that wants to get up and down the floor. That was a fascinating, not to go in reverse here, but that was a fascinating aspect of the Cavs series to me too. I couldn't believe how much better conditioned the Pacers looked in fourth quarters of those games. Absolutely. Because Cleveland is so deep, and they do have the athletes. And to me, if I'm a Cavs fan, that's maybe the most disappointing thing, is just how late in games it looked like the Pacers physically were ready to be there from a conditioning standpoint, and the Cavs didn't always look that way.
100%. I'm talking to Pat Boylan, radio play-by-play voice of the Indiana Pacers and the Indiana Fever, here on the Basketball Show. Let's make the transition right now over to the WNBA, because you've got a very exciting game tomorrow, Pat. The Fever, often talked about, of course, because of the great Caitlin Clark, the large, humongous shadow she has cast over this entire league. Now you've got the rivalry between herself and Angel Reese from Chicago. Both teams have added more pieces to the puzzle. Maybe frame the game tomorrow and how you see these teams matching up and what you expect from this contest.
It'll be interesting to see where both of these teams are right out of the gates, because these were 2 teams last year that definitely took a step forward with their rookie class, that were young, exciting, enticing. The Fever more so than the Sky, but that's not to demean anything that Chicago did. They, I think, took a big first step in the right direction over there too. And then the offseason comes in, and for Chicago, they've added a former Olympic gold medalist in Ariel Atkins in the offseason. They've seemingly done a good job in the draft. Their young players are a year older. And the Fever offseason was potentially transformative. They brought in 2 All-Stars. So now all 5 of Indiana's starting lineup, if Stephanie White wants to go that way, will be All-Stars. They brought in Sophie Cunningham, who I think is going to be somebody who's a candidate for 6th Woman of the Year. That depth allows Lexi Hull to now come off the bench, Sydney Colson. So both of these teams feel like they're better than last year. Now, the Fever were ahead of Chicago last year, and I would argue had a better offseason, and I think most people would too, than Chicago. So I think from a Fever perspective, you're hoping that at the end of the season, you're not talking about 2 teams that are in the same tier or in the same realm. The Fever, I think, view themselves as a step or 2 ahead of Chicago, but that's not to suggest the Sky are not headed in the right direction. I thought the Atkins move was one of the best of the entire offseason. And as you noted, this is a rivalry that started early last year. And as somebody that gets to do the Fever games when they're not on ABC or ESPN, I haven't called a Chicago Sky game in a long time, because ESPN and ABC keep grabbing these games, which includes the opener on Saturday for the Fever as well. So unfortunately won't get to broadcast that one, but we'll be there watching in attendance. And both of these teams have just had a lot of off-season turnover, which they view as steps forward. But at the same time, it can be interesting to see where you are right out of the gates from a chemistry and a cohesion perspective, because the Fever roster looks very, very different than a year ago. And I think one of the big storylines for them is how quickly does this all come together? When it comes together, it should be very, very good. Is that happening in May? Is it happening in June? Hopefully for the Fever, not July. But it's one of those easier said than done type of things, and it takes time on the floor to actually determine where you are. So I think we'll maybe get a first good indication of where all of that is and where the process is of this group coming together in 2025.
You know, Pat, it's I think the season's about half as long as the NBA's, but 40 games is a lot of games, and a lot can change in your chemistry development. I guess if you were going to make a parallel in terms of radical change, the team that very different personnel, but in terms of the number of good players that you've brought in and the way that your roster has been reshaped, it does remind me a bit of the Timberwolves. And from this standpoint, the Timberwolves, I think, were such an extreme example of a team that struggled with its new pieces and now seems to be peaking with the personnel that they have at the exact right time. You've got a completely opposite situation where you've got like stellar talent, like you're pointing out, at all positions. It all does kind of revolve around the sun, which is Caitlin Clark, so to speak. But what are your expectations? Speaking of Caitlin Clark, in her sophomore season in the WNBA, we haven't talked a lot about Caitlin over the last months, or the last 2 years. That's all everybody talked about. Mm-hmm. Now she's kind of been out of the limelight a bit. Looks like, physically she's put on muscle. Obviously, has been working very hard. Has a year under her belt, is used to always has been used to, but even more mature in handling all the pressure. What have you seen so far, and what are your expectations out of the gate for Caitlin?
Well, I think all those things that you have said or seen from afar, I think I would say are accurate up close. First of all, just from a physical standpoint, she is stronger. She did want to make that a priority this offseason. The league is much more physical than college basketball, and I think she experienced some of that. And just being able, on the defensive end to stand your ground better, to not get pushed around on the offensive end, is going to take her game up to another level. Now, we're talking about a player that as a rookie finished 4th in the MVP voting. So she already was at a really, really high level, and she set the bar for herself extremely high. So she comes into this season. I think there's a few areas from an improvement standpoint that I'll look at from her. I think you're going to see her turnovers drop precipitously. If you wanted to nitpick, and it would be really nitpicky on a historically good rookie season, one that, again, put her in the MVP conversation, it would just be that she'll be the first to tell you her turnover numbers were higher than where they need to be as she, gets into the prime of her career, which, by the way, she's not even close to yet. She's still just 23 years old. And so for her, I think it's those turnover numbers starting to come down as she gets more comfortable and confident. And frankly, some of that will just happen naturally with the players around her. She's got more talent. Some of those turnovers last year were maybe players that weren't quite ready for the ball to be where it came, where she was able to deliver it, or maybe not having quite the skill set to cash in on all of those. And what's kind of scary is she had so many assists last year, and I think there were still, as our color analyst Debbie Antonelli likes to call them, coaches assists, where you set up an assist and the player misses a shot that they should hit. Well, she had a lot of coaches assists last year, despite leading the league in the assist category. Now, the one thing I think is important to keep in context here is last year, Caitlin Clark had spectacular numbers, and a lot of them was the scoring that she did. And that's because the Fever desperately needed her to be that level of a scorer. They had Kelsey Mitchell and Aaliyah Boston, and they had other good offensive players, but they were really dependent on Clark's ability to score. They still will be, but there's so much more talent around her. And so it wouldn't be shocking to me if she took a significant step forward this year, but that didn't necessarily mean that she scores more points this year. There's one ball to go around 5 starters who are all stars. And to me, the way that this all works, at least the way that it works at its maximum capacity, is if everyone's touching the ball and everyone's doing their thing and you can't hone in on any individual player. And so I think you could see the assist numbers go up because of that. I think it's possible that she realizes, that she doesn't need to take quite as many shots, or that if she sets up a teammate, will get an even better look than she could have created on her own. These are the best teammates she's ever had around her in her career. So I think that ultimately is going to make her a better player. It's going to make the Fever a better team. It's possible at the end of the year, when you're putting your points per game up last year and this year, that there is a little bit of a drop off. Maybe not. Maybe she goes up. But I fully expect her to take another significant step forward this season. The box score might just look a little bit different because of how much talent is around her this year versus last year.
It is going to be interesting to see how this chemistry unfolds for the team, because you have hit on a very real scenario where you've got a lot of players used to having the ball in their hands. And Caitlin broke records because she was a high volume shooter. She seems to be mature enough and comfortable enough in her own skin that I don't think she needs to feel like she has to score 25 a game in order to validate herself. And in fact, I think everybody often forgets that she not only broke the Pistols scoring record in college, but she also broke the assist record.
Correct.
So, she is just a gifted passer. And if she really buys into that and makes all her teammates happy, look out.
No question. And if you look at last season as a rookie, she led the league in assists. She set the record for assists in a single game, set the WNBA record for that. And if you talk to her and you said, hey, Caitlin, would you rather have a 15 assist or a 30-point game? She'll tell you she'd rather have a 15 assist game. She is naturally unselfish. She has a killer scoring mentality, but she is naturally quite unselfish. And so I don't think for her that this will be a problem at all. In fact, I think if anything, it's gonna showcase her game even more and showcase how good she is, because at the beginning of the season, ESPN, I still remember this motion graphic that ESPN ran after the first couple games of the year, where they showed over and over, and Rebecca Lobo was doing the analysis of how Clark would be face guarded 35 feet from the hoop, and her defender would be right up in her grill with her back to the basketball, her back to everything that was going on. Her job was solely to keep Caitlin Clark from going anywhere, and even 40 feet from the hoop, which of course in a natural basketball strategy, that's a very poor strategy, because then you're allowing the other team to go 4-on-4 instead of 5-on-5, which is advantage offense. But she had, as a rookie, more attention on her than any rookie has ever had. And I'm not talking about the spotlight and off the floor. I'm talking about how defenses handled her. And while the Fever did have Kelsey Mitchell and Aaliyah Boston, oftentimes other teams said, listen, if we lose to those two, we'll tip our cap. We're not letting Caitlin beat us. The teams were less and less successful as the year went on at that. But I think what you're going to see here is all of a sudden, when you got Bonner and Howard in the mix along with Mitchell and Boston, I think Clark's going to have more room to do her own thing, less focus on her, because there's too much talent on the floor, and that's going to showcase her own skill set even more. So she is like the last person in the world that I would be concerned with having issue with her shot number going down. But it's not to say that whole dynamic in totality is not worth watching. DeWanna Bonner is a 6-time All-Star, and she's won a couple of titles, and she's played in more playoff games than anybody. And Natasha Howard, the other big name they brought in, has won 3 championships and made a couple All-Stars herself. So these are type of players that understand what it takes to win at a big stage, and they understand that's not any one player taking 30 shots a game. So I think they brought in the right type of players for a situation like this. But still, it's an adjustment whenever you compile a team of this many players that are as capable as they are, because all 5 of those at any given time could take over the game if necessary. But that's not what's necessary typically, and that's not always the right thing for the Fever. So finding your role and understanding that statistically that might mean a slight step back for you, and not only being okay with that, but understanding it's for the betterment of the team. That's still an important storyline to watch in all of this and how the Fever handle that. But I really do think they have the right type of players and personalities in place where that's not going to be an issue. But again, we'll get our first test and our first look at it on Saturday, but it's the first of just the league actually added 4 games this year. So it's a 44-game season now. So still about half of the NBA, but one of 44. You'll be just getting started after Saturday, but I think a good first look at where this team is.
A season is definitely a marathon, not a sprint, isn't it?
No question, no question. In compared to the NBA, it's a little bit more of a sprint, but no question, it's a long year. You know, the Fever are going to be the WNBA is going to be played in regular season games in September, and at least here in Indianapolis, where it's just started to get warm, and September is when it starts to get cold. That seems like a long ways away. So we were doing I was doing some hits with some local news stations here, and I made the point that the Pacers were good enough to run into the Fever season this year. Hopefully the Fever are good enough to run into the Pacers season when the Pacers are starting back up in October. And then when I made that comment, I kind of thought, wow, October seems like a really long ways away. And the WNBA used to be more of a sprint than it is. Like the league when it started was 32 games and then 34 and then 36, 44 and 82. Very different numbers, but 44 is still enough now to where if you get yourself into an early hole, you can work your way out of it. The Fever experienced that last year in a 40-game season. You know, they got off to that 2-7 start and ended up in the playoffs. And the hope this year is that you don't have to do that. The schedule is much more manageable right out of the gates. You've got the personnel in place where I think they should hit the ground running here, but we'll see. We'll find out starting on Saturday, and then Indiana has a couple of games, a home and home with Atlanta on Tuesday, Thursday, and then that kind of tips off, if you go back to the very beginning of our conversation, just the hectic nature of what the next week or so looks like, because the Fever will play on Tuesday, and then Pacers game 1 will be Wednesday, and then the Fever will play Thursday, and then Pacers game 2 will be Friday, and then the Fever will play Saturday, and then Pacers game 3 will be Sunday. It's crazy. It's great crazy. It's positive crazy, but it's crazy.
Well, I know you're ready for the marathon, and right now all basketball roads seem to lead to Indianapolis.
Hey, we wouldn't want it any other way. This is such a cool moment for this city. And as we were talking, to have, you know, the city kind of gets the national and international spotlight for the Indy 500 as well. So to have 3 of these major storylines in sports right now, the Indy 500, the Eastern Conference Finals, you know, the Fever are the women's pro sports franchise. All of those things happening here in an 8-day stretch is just, it's phenomenal for our city. And we're so fortunate to have all of this just kind of fall into our lap. And for people like me that have nothing to do with the on-court success, we just get to talk about it for a living. It's so gratifying and so fulfilling. I remember a couple of years ago, and don't get me wrong, I had a blast doing my job when this was the case then, and it still beats actually working for a living. But I remember a couple of years ago, the Fever were 5-31, and the Pacers were kind of in the doldrums of a rebuild. Now, it turns out a very quick rebuild, but you didn't know that at the time. And the Pacers season was ending in early mid-April, and the Fever season was starting 5 or 6 weeks later, but there wasn't near the spotlight on it. There wasn't near the level of success that we're seeing now. And in a couple of short years, to be talking a second straight Eastern Conference Finals and to be talking about a second season here with Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever, and just the excitement around all of that, you soak it in. It's not always going to be like this. And so for those of us that have the good fortune to be around it, we're just trying to soak it in. And there couldn't be, I think, a more exciting 8-day stretch if you could have dreamed it up here for this city.
Well, I look forward to talking on the backside of that 8-day stretch with you again, Pat. I really appreciate your making the time today as you get ready for this big, exciting undertaking. Pat Boylan, play-by-play voice of the Pacers and the Fever. Thanks so much for joining me on the Basketball Show.
Hey, when you talk about what's changed in these last couple of years, I wasn't regularly doing any radio hits in Canada previously either. So that's been a cool bonus for me as well. It's good to chat with you as always.
As always, Pat. Take care.